So thank you and welcome back, everyone, whether were here for the meditation or whether you just joined us. I'm really glad you're here. My name is Ian, and I'm going to be offering the Dharma reflection for today. And I want to talk about reconnecting in friendliness. So I'm kind of wanting to notice what's happening here, wanting to notice the feeling in a room or a field or a Zoom quilt of intentional practice, live hearts and minds and bodies. And yes, of course, we are individuals, and yet we're connected by an intention toward peace and healing, shared intentions, supported intentions. And so just for a moment, honoring that, feeling that, how rare it is, that we can say, it's worth my time and my efforts to show up in this way. Engaging for a time in the creation of an intentional practice community, spiritual community, what we call sangha. So in the traditional teachings, sangha referred to monastics and also lay people, people like us, who practice and who hold vows, and people who've chosen for all time or even just for a time, like a month or 2 weeks or 3 days or 90 minutes, to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and to hold the precepts, to manifest these intentions of non-harming and moving toward freedom and kindness and liberation. So in formal practice, we sometimes take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the triple gem, like we did at our 4-day retreat last month. And the Buddha represents our inherent luminousness, our Buddha nature. Dharma, we take refuge in the teachings, but you can also look at that as just the nature of things as they are. And then we take refuge in the Sangha, this body of folks, this intentional community, people that are choosing to explore and committed to offering as much safety and care as they can to each other in the process of exploring. And it isn't necessary, and I always point this out when I mention Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it isn't at all necessary to identify as a Buddhist, to be here, to practice together, or partake of this kind of community. And we're all welcome exactly as we show up, and we aren't asked to be other than who we are. So sometimes we use the Pali words, and Pali is the language that the Buddha's teachings were written down in originally. We use the words Kalyana Mitta, meaning spiritual friend. And that can be used for our teachers, and it can be used for our peers, and it can be used for people that we're mentoring and helping. Kalyana Mitta, spiritual friend. And so Sangha is an expression of spiritual friendship, a gathering of spiritual friends. And so I'm starting here because that's where we are. And there's a couple of suttas that record conversations with the Buddha and his disciples about spiritual friendship. And there's one where he's talking to Ananda, who's his very close student and attendant. And Ananda enthusiastically says, "Good friends, sir, companions and associates are half the spiritual life." And the Buddha replies to Ananda, "Not so, Ananda, not so. Good friends, companions, and associates are the whole of the spiritual life. A person with good friends, companions, and associates can expect to develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path." And I think that's so interesting that the Buddha calls this the whole of the spiritual life. And it appears several times in the suttas. And I believe what he's saying is that it's whole in the sense that it's essential, that without spiritual friendship, without friends along the path, without people to accompany, teach, encourage, offer us an example that the movement to freedom isn't possible. And we need people to relate to in order to become more free. And you know, it's often said you can't do this alone and no one can do it for you, which points to this this need to practice with others, and also this need to do the work for ourselves. And so I want to invoke that sense of friendliness today. You know, all of us brought together by this beautiful and unusual need or intention or calling or movement towards spiritual practice. And maybe the need isn't so unusual. I think it's probably pretty universal, but it's not so usual to act on it, to show up and to say, yeah, I'm going to take some steps in this direction. And there is something truly revolutionary when we come together to practice this way of awareness, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. You can feel that. And it doesn't happen by magic, you know, it's a lot of work. Creating sangha, creating community anywhere is a practice in itself. It's something that the Buddha did for 40 years of his life, and it wasn't particularly easy for him. And many of us, you know, here today work in fields of creating community, whether Dharma community or political community or care communities or affinity communities, and we give our time, and we know that difficulty of creating community, and we know its value. So it's said that we are always taking refuge in something. And what we take refuge in is a question of our conditioning, our history, the culture that we either swim in unconsciously or swim against, and our companions. We have a choice. Where do we look for refuge? And then where do we actually find it? And maybe we've woken up enough to know where we cannot find refuge. But that question and that ongoing exploration is, where is it safe to rest our heart? So I just mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's a great Vietnamese Zen master, and probably did more to create sangha all over the world in this age than anyone that I can think of, because of his practice, his activism, his teaching, his spiritual friendship, and his ability and determination to build and support community. And so one of his centers is here in California. It's called Deer Park in Escondido, and I'm sure several or more than several of us have visited there. It's beautiful in the mountains outside Escondido. And because his teachings touched me so deeply, I made the pilgrimage to practice in community with him the last two times that he visited in person, in 2011 and 2013. And in addition to his teachings in the hall that was filled completely to overflowing, he offered walking meditation practice outside. And so to walk silently, mindfully, with literally hundreds and hundreds of other people in the footsteps of this great teacher, something I'll never forget, and just the most amazing expression of sangha. You know, to be that many people, to be silent together, to be friendly together, to be respectful together, to practice together. And as we started up the hill, a man said to me, "Brother, may I hold your hand? Brother, may I hold your hand?" And I was like, "What?" and then, of course, we walked hand in hand uphill in the sun for a while, and then in the forest, And I've never forgotten that gesture of friendliness, of accompanying and care. I haven't experienced that in Dharma communities, that sort of, that physical contact. May I hold your hand? It was so beautiful. A total stranger, but a spiritual friend. And at one point on our walk, it was a hot day and our hands were sweating. And he looked over and he very carefully switched the hand he was using to hold mine so that he could wipe off the sweat. And then he switched back. And I've never forgotten that moment. Like, even for a second, I'm not going anywhere. I am here for you. And the reassurance of that, I am here for you. And when we arrived at the end of the walk, of course, it was silent. And so we bowed to each other and there weren't any words or speaking, and just kind of moved back into the greater sangha. And I never saw that person again. And yet I'm forever changed by that kindness, that care of a stranger, that embodiment of the Kalyanamitta, the spiritual friend, someone who is there for you as you are. And I don't know now, after years of practice, that I could express that so easily, so gracefully. And I'm working on it, and it takes some time. And it's sometimes helpful for me to remember as I practice, as I notice my own forward movement sometimes and resistance sometimes, that that the practice is not an endeavor of space and time. One of my teachers, Gina Sharp, says that the practice is not an endeavor of space and time, but outside of it. So I try not to set a timetable and simply trust what is bringing me here, the direction that I'm turning, like a sunflower, this gradual inclining, persistence in the practice without the timetable, loving persistence. And then that question, can I take my own hand in the process? Can you take your own hand as kindly as that stranger and spiritual friend did years ago? Can we befriend ourselves and our own experience in that way? And that can be a lot to ask. It can be scary, and that's what this talk is about, befriending and accompanying ourselves with friendliness. And this isn't just something nice to say, and I've often heard this kind of talk and sort of thought, of course, and on some level not quite believed that it applied to me. Or maybe I'll do that self-kindness thing later on, after I've gotten everything else done, after I've mastered the Dharma. But I haven't always put it first. And yet it's foundational to the spiritual life, that spiritual friendship, external and internal. So if there isn't kindness in the field, true presence isn't possible. If there isn't a fundamental intention, however imperfectly expressed, of care, we don't open up as easily. We're guarded. We're in a protected mode. So I don't know if you've ever done that that practice where you make a fist with your right hand, and you can do this right now if you'd like to, and you can imagine that that the fist is there for good reason. It's protecting you. It's helping keep you safe. And then you can take your other hand and try to open the fist, try and pry it open. Like, I'm here for you. Open up. Let me get inside there. And then just see what happens. And if you're like me, your right hand is going to resist that effort to try and unclasp it. But then just notice if you take that left hand and hold it gently under your right fist, what happens? immediately for me, there's a relaxation, there's a sense of ease. So nothing, you know, that left hand is doing nothing other than saying, it's okay, I'm here for you, I've got you. You don't have to do anything. And it's only when we feel some measure of safety and kindness and support and care that we can open. And this is true whether we're talking about being in a group or whether we're with this very dear and worthy one right here. If all I'm interested in is my self-improvement and wanting myself to be other than I am, then I'm operating out of aversion rather than deep caring. So bell hooks wrote in her beautiful book, All About Love, I was in my mid-20s when I first learned to understand love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Not teaching or trying to convince or anything like that, but the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Not to gain something, not to have something, but to nurture. And that's the Kalyanamitta energy. And so maybe we've been practicing for many, many years, and maybe we feel like a beginner, and maybe we feel like a beginner some days and like quite experienced other days. Wherever we are in terms of experience and history, this energy of kindness and friendliness is our essential foundation, essential to everything that we do on the spiritual path. So maybe we've received and internalized messages of shame and unworthiness. Maybe we've experienced depression and hatred, separation, because of course we have. And maybe we feel that we can't take up space or that there's just something fundamentally wrong with me. And so I really want to emphasize two things that may be of value in your practice, no matter where you are. Looking with kindly eyes is the first one, and looking deeply. And this phrase, kindly eyes, comes from a place in the Buddha's teaching where he's describing a peaceful, supportive community. And he describes them as living in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes. And I love that phrase and that image, regarding each other with kindly eyes. And so this is the same energy that we can remember and develop in relation to our communities, our friends, and so importantly, to ourselves in practice. So we sometimes come to meditation practice and maybe we think it's going to go a certain way, and maybe we have like a little bit of an agenda. It's going to be very relaxing, very peaceful, and maybe I'll have a lovely, beautiful experience. And then it's like, oh no, my mind won't stop. I'm obsessed with something I'm worrying about for the future. I'm in pain about something that happened in the past, or I can't stop replaying this yucky experience or story, or I'm in grief, or I'm angry. This isn't what's supposed to be happening. And so now, in addition to whatever it is that's I'm entangled with, I'm also feeling bad because I'm not doing it right, or I'm hopeless, or I've been practicing for years and I'm not further along. So this is where this practice of kindly eyes comes in. In those moments, there's the invitation to stop, just stop for a moment, and to regard ourselves with kindly eyes, to invite that inner spiritual friend, that inner Kalyanamita, and to then look deeply with those kindly eyes, even if it's something that's not so easy to be with. You know, when a friend, someone we look upon tells us, someone we look upon with kindly eyes tells us that they're in pain, you know, we pay attention with kindness. Whatever we're experiencing is what we're experiencing. It's nature and it's happening. I may not like it, and it's also here right now. Just like I might not like the rainstorm that kicks up when we're hiking, or the pain in my knee, or that old argument with a partner, yet there it is. And so now, how do I relate? And so this is where we're invited to befriend ourselves, letting these kindly eyes of our own spiritual friend flutter open to witness what it is we're experiencing, to hold ourselves and our experience with love. And if love feels like too much, holding ourselves with care, or holding ourselves with respect, or even just holding ourselves and our experience with patience. So the Buddha invited us into the practice of being mindful of our mind states, or what we sometimes call moods. Just as we can be mindful of our bodies and sensation in the body, we can bring awareness to our mind states. You know, that's what the third of the four foundations of mindfulness, knowing the internal weather. And when we know that, seeing how we might like to respond. You know, that just as we can be aware of the breath or sound or body, we can also be aware of how it is with us and how it's moving and changing. You know, being like that friend who really cares. How are you, dear one? Or that friend who just puts out a hand, or that friend who just listens and sits with you. That friend that knows our internal weather might not be clear skies and sunshine, and still stays close. And we can do this for ourselves too, inquiring into our own experience with care, holding our own hand and saying, how is it with you? Nothing needs to be done at this point, just the witnessing. A friend shared some writings on the subject of friendship by the poet David Whyte. And there were just a couple lines I wanted to read where he wrote, "The ultimate touchstone of friendship is not improvement, neither of the other nor of the self. The ultimate touchstone is witness." So witness being the privilege of seeing and being seen, just as we are in our human experience, accompanying, even when it's messy, even when it's hot and our hands are sweating. You know, can I bring that exquisite care that that man did at Escondido to the relationship with myself? You know, I'm not letting go. I may need to reposition, I may need to adjust, but I'm not letting go. I'm here, I'm with you, I'm witnessing. And in that witnessing is space. And I remember I think it was the very first Dharma talk that Larry Yang gave to this sangha. And he said very simply and profoundly, it felt to me, what you are aware of, you are not lost in. What you are aware of, you are not lost in. So we create space through the witnessing, and in that space there's the possibility of wisdom. And in this simple giving of space, what is difficult has the possibility of untangling and loosening, because we aren't bossing it around, saying it shouldn't be there, and we aren't trying to pry it open before it's ready. We aren't in opposition. We are in support. We are with. And it can be very interesting to watch that how that persistent accompanying loosens what's very tight inside. So for many years, I carried a knot of tension and anxiety. I carried right here, my solar plexus. And I wasn't really even fully aware that it was there until I started practicing and became more attuned to my body, because I was one of those people who lived pretty much in my head, and the body just followed the head around. But I started noticing, wow, there's a lot of tightness here. And then I started noticing, when do I experience that? How long does it last? What's the story that goes along with it? And I got to know the story, and it was related to fear of being unwelcome, fear of making mistakes, being vulnerable to group disapproval and danger. And so, sort of knowing the story, I could begin to let it rest a little bit. And I didn't try and talk myself out of it. Instead, I just worked on knowing the experience with an inner friendliness, a kind of patience. And I didn't need to keep telling myself the story and adding more and more layers. Instead, every time I noticed the feeling, which was often in situations that, on paper were externally at least safe enough, I simply held the experience of discomfort with as much kindness and patience as possible. Just noticing it, feeling it, creating enough space and kindness in the field that I didn't have to react immediately to it or run from it. What you are aware of, you aren't lost in. And that was my way of practicing with it for a number of years. And gradually it loosened, and I got disentangled from that. And the process was so gradual that I didn't realize that it had changed, the sensation had changed, until I was talking to a friend about the knot that they held in their own chest, and realized that mine had softened enough to no longer be a prevalent experience. That just from kind noticing, kind accompanying, without needing to fix, without retelling myself the story again and again, but just being patient and kind, it was enough to loosen that hardness, that knot, to where I almost never feel it now. So I am staying with this idea of inner friendliness because for me, I've seen how it can have an effect. And more, I want that friendliness to be a foundation of my experience, not an extra practice or not something that I'm going to do later on. It's a means to healing, and it feels good. Without that kindness, untangling is really difficult. And it's something that I'm still learning. What if I can bring kindness to more of these moments? Oh, you're feeling this. You're feeling this right now, and it's hard. I see it, and I'm here for you. Let me hold your hand as we hold this together. Witnessing is healing. In kindness, there is space. And in that space, there is possible for movement to take place. Untangling, relaxing, moving energy through. And can that be enough? I heard a beautiful talk by Pascal Auclair, a queer Canadian teacher, that he offered online several years ago. And he said something in the talk that blew my mind, and so I noted it down. And he said, a good use of time, and by this he meant a lifetime, would be to give love to this one right here. A good use of time would be to give love to this one right here. He said, I will cherish this one. That is a good use of this life. And I thought that was very bold. It blew my mind. You mean caring for yourself, caring for me is valid, is real, is worthwhile, is in line with the Dharma? And it is. If we take that bodhisattva vow to be a spiritual friend to all beings, we have to start right here. And we can sometimes be kind to others, even helpful, even healing for others without being totally established in our care for ourselves. This is true. We can be a spiritual friend wherever we are on the path. Yet when that foundational primary love, that core of the one right here is developed and strong, then we go from being of benefit to from sometimes being of benefit to maybe often being of benefit, and maybe someday always being of benefit, because we have that internal foundation that we can depend on to show up in how we relate to others, because it has its root right here. So we can keep watering that root, keep looking with kindly eyes and looking deeply. So let's take a moment for a little meditation and allowing the words to flow like water down the river, knowing whatever nourishment you needed from them is yours, and letting the rest go. And reconnecting with the body and the breath. And then, if you like, checking in with how you are right now. What's the state of mind? Uplifted, tired, rested, anxious, hopeful, distracted. Just noticing that internal weather. Not needing to do anything with what's there, just knowing how it is in this moment. And staying with the experience of the body breathing, feeling the body, feeling the breath. not thinking about, but seeing if you can feel them. And then, just if you'd like, see if you can imagine a pair of the kindest eyes that you can think of. Maybe the eyes of Kuan Yin, or a very dear friend or relative, or a spiritual guide of some sort. And imagine these kindly eyes opening and seeing you just as you are right now. Seeing you with care, with tenderness, with compassion. Seeing how it is to be seen in this way. And then experimenting, is it possible to see yourself through those eyes? Seeing yourself through kindly eyes. Stephen Charleston, who is a Native American elder and former Episcopal Bishop of Alaska, wrote this: "A pair of kindly eyes are watching over you, eyes like a grandmother has, deep and still, looking out from the creased lines of an honest face weathered by 1,000 suns, patience embodied in compassion. These eyes have been watching you since before you were born. They will keep their vigil until one day when your soul opens its own eyes and starts watching too. Another angel keeping watch over those in need of love." we have a few minutes and would love to hear any reflections. Anyone might have anything you'd like to share. I'm very curious also how that practice was for you, if it landed or not. And yeah, so if you'd like to, please unmute yourself and join in, or raise your hand and I can recognize you. Okay. Well, I think we'll close here, and I will just invite you to go forth into your world, however it's unfolding, with kindly eyes, and to look deeply with those kindly eyes. And may our practice here today, and may your practice as you move forward into the world, bring benefit without limit to beings everywhere. And thank you for your practice and your kind attention. So see you soon, I hope, and keep practicing. Take care.